네, 잠시 후 제3회 한미산업협력 컨퍼런스가 진행이 될 예정에 있습니다. 행사를 위해 행사장 외부에 계신 분들께서는 행사장 내로 입장하신 후 자리에 착석해 주시기 바라며, 또한 원활한 행사 진행을 위해 소지하고 계신 휴대폰은 잠시 꺼주시거나 진동 모드로 전환시켜 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 또한 오늘 행사는 동시 통역으로 진행됩니다. 테이블 위에 있는 리시버를 사용하실 경우에는 1번은 한국어, 2번은 영어로 진행되고 있으니 이 점 참고해 주시기 바랍니다. 다시 한 번 더 여러분들께 안내 말씀드리도록 하겠습니다. 잠시 후 본 컨퍼런스가 진행되도록 하겠습니다. 행사 진행을 위해 행사장 외부에 계신 분들께서는 행사장대로 입장하신 후 자리에 착석해 주시기 바라며, 또한 원활한 행사 진행을 위해 소지하고 계신 휴대폰은 진동 모드로 전환시켜 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 오늘 행사는 동시 통역으로 진행되며 테이블 위에 있는 리시버는 1번은 한국어, 2번은 영어로 진행되고 있다는 점 여러분 참고해 주시기 바랍니다. 그럼 오늘 행사를 진행해 주실 사회자를 여러분들께 소개해 드리도록 하겠습니다. 오늘 함께해 주실 분은 대한상공회의소의 뉴 미디어 팀 조연수님을 여러분들께 소개하도록 하겠습니다. 여러분 큰 박수로 맞이해 주시기 바랍니다.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Yeonsu Cho from the new media team of KCCI. And I am the MC for today's Korea-US Industrial Cooperation Conference. So now let us begin Korea-US Industrial Cooperation Conference. First, we will begin with an opening speech by Mr. Choi Jung-kyung, Chairman of Korea-America Association. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
네, 영어가 더 편한 분들이 있기 때문에 영어로 하겠습니다. 네. Vice Minister of Industry, Trade and Resource, Honorable Jang Young-jin, Commerce Counselor of U.S. Embassy in Seoul, Honorable Jay Biggs, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for the third Korea-America Industrial Cooperation Conference despite your busy schedule. It is my great honor to deliver the opening speech and to welcome all the participants from the Korean government, the U.S. Embassy, corporations, industrial associations, and our co-hosting organizations, Korea Chamber of Commerce and AmCham Korea. I would like to remind you that this year marks the 70th anniversary of Korea-US Alliance. As you can see, the Korea-US Alliance has come a long way despite a range of challenges along the way. The maintenance of a strong Korea-US Alliance and the partnership matters not only in security, but also in the field of economic field as well. The sustainable relationship should be based on economic common interests between Seoul and Washington. From this point of view, the importance of Korea-US industrial cooperation cannot be emphasized too much. Building sustainable supply chain is a critical issue for both Korea and the United States of America and requires close cooperation between the two countries for achieving more efficiency gains. To further discuss how the two countries can cooperate on this matter, the hosting organizations decided this year's conference theme to be mother factory strategies for advanced industries. As we all agree, combining US technologies and Korea's super manufacturing capability would create positive synergy effect. I want to give special thanks to Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry and Vice Chairman Woo Tae-hee for helping us prepare for this fantastic program. Once again, thank you all very much for joining, and I hope you enjoy the sessions today and continue to support the Korea-America Association and industrial cooperation between Korea and United States of America. We go together. 같이 갑시다. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opening speech. 잠시 공지드리겠습니다. 동시 통역이 필요하신 분께서는 앞에 놓인 리시버를 활용하셔서 1번은 한국어, 2번은 영어니까 착용해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. Now, Mr. Woo Tae-hee, Executive Vice Chairman of Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry, will deliver a welcome address. Please give him a big round of applause.
Good morning. Welcome to Korea-US Industrial Cooperation Conference co-hosted by KAA, KCCI, and AmCham together. This is our third conference since 2021, and today we will focus on implementing the mother factory strategy across high-tech industries. I'd like to thank all those who arranged today's conference. Also, my gratitude goes to MOTI for their unwavering support and professors and experts who joined us this morning. The COVID-19 and the subsequent geopolitical challenges highlighted the importance of securing manufacturing capacities. To this end, the US introduced the CHIPS Act and IRA last year and has been providing significant incentives to attract a vast amount of investments. So Korean semiconductor and battery manufacturers are ramping up massive investments to United States. I believe that the concept of mother factory is a strategy that both countries could mutually benefit from. The term itself was first appeared in Japan in 1990s when the country was losing its competitive edge due to hollowing out of various industries. It is a division strategy where domestic core plants guide research, development, and productions while leading overseas plants in localization and mass production. Through this strategy, Korean companies could secure production cost competency and increase customer access, and the states will be capable of enlarging the production capability and creating more jobs. Semiconductor and battery cell manufacturing in Korea's strong suit, and the US boasts the excellent semiconductor design skills alongside powerhouse automakers. I'm confident that our strengths could bring a bigger synergy effect, so I call for much closer cooperation on three aspects. First, we need to expand research and development corporations. Second, we need to have solid supply chain corporations. And lastly, we need to create an excellent investment climate where both countries could take advantage of. I hope today's conference be the first step towards revisiting our partnership with more objective perspectives and seeking the better version of our cooperation. Once again, thank you for being with us this meaningful occasion, and I wish you all successful conference. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Mr. Woo, for the warm remarks. Now we have Mr. James Kim, Chairman of AmCham, for his welcome remarks. Please look at the video screen.
Good morning. What a great honor it is to be here today. I really wish I could be there in person. I'm sorry I could not due to other obligations. First and foremost, I want to thank Chae Jung-kyung, the Chairman and President of the Korea American Association, for organizing this very meaningful event. I've known the chairman for many years, and I look at him as an outstanding leader. I also want to thank the KCCI Executive Vice Chairman, Mr. Wu Tae-hee, for again helping organize this outstanding event. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the U.S.-Korea alliance. And as we commemorate this meaningful milestone, I'm so thrilled that AmCham can be part of this meaningful event. Under the leadership of President Biden and President Yoon, we have seen the U.S.-Korea relationship reaching really new heights. Economic partnership between the two countries have both diversified and have deepened. The stronger U.S.-Korea relationship also comes at a critical juncture involving supply chain and other geopolitical uncertainties. President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to Washington, D.C. earlier this year and the recent U.S.-Korea-Japan trilateral summit highlights the now even more important relationship and partnership in managing the global challenges that we see ahead. Given the potential synergy between the U.S. and Korea, the two countries are working together to explore a lot of opportunities on global supply chains and to enhance strategic partnerships. Korea is a leader in R&D and manufacturing technology. It is really important to the U.S. government's strategy for the Indo-Pacific region and global supply chain opportunities. Collaboration between U.S. and Korean companies such as Applied Materials, Lam Research, Qualcomm, GM, LG Energy Solutions, Samsung, and SK really signify why the two countries are working so well together and why these companies are so important to each other as well. AmCham is deeply committed to creating more of these win-win possibilities between the U.S. and Korea. And we really support President Yoon and President Biden's vision to make this alliance even more powerful. I am super excited about the many more months and years ahead. Today's event will help strengthen and enhance the possibilities between the two countries and the two nations. I want to thank again the Korea American Association and KCCI for organizing this meaningful event. Have a great event. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Now, I'd like to invite Mr. Jang Young-jin, Vice Minister of MOTI, for his congratulatory remarks. Please welcome Mr. Jang to the stage.
안녕하십니까. 산업통상자원부 1차관 장윤주입니다. 오늘 우리 주최 측에서 훌륭한 통역을 준비해 주셨다 그래서 저는 한국말로 하겠습니다. 예, 먼저 이번에 3회째를 맞는 한미 산업협력 컨퍼런스 개최를 진심으로 축하드립니다. 최근 들어 WTO의 어떤 룰 베이스드 트레이드가 좀 위축되고 어떤 산업 베이스의 어떤 수출 통제라든가 그 산업 베이스의 어떤 무역 패턴이 강화되는 상황에서 이렇게 산업협력을 주제로 한 한미 간의 산업협력을 주제로 한 컨퍼런스가 있다는 것은 유일한 것이고 매우 귀하다고 하겠습니다. 이런 귀한 자리를 마련해주신 우리 최준경 한미협회 회장님, 그리고 우태희 대한상의 부회장님, 그리고 제임스 킴 암참 회장님, 그리고 바쁜 시간에 참석해 주신 우리 제이빅스 주한미국 대사관 상무 참석관님께 감사를 드리고 오늘 또 온라인으로 발제를 맡아주신 CRS의 마크 매닝 박사님과 캐런 셔터 박사님께도 깊은 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 아까 여러분께서 말씀하셨지만 지난 5월 우리 윤석열 대통령 취임 이후 한미 관계가 정말 과거의 어느 때보다도 더 깊고 발전하고 있습니다. 공식적으로 우리 지난달에 한미일 정상회담을 포함해서 1년여 기간 동안 3차례 양국 정상이 만나셨고 다자 회의를 통해서 플러 사이드로 만난 것 같이 합치면 한 10여 회 이상 된다고 합니다. 그런 결과를 토대로 특히 지난 4월에 국빈 방문 계기에는 한 50여 건의 MOU를 통해서 우리 안보 분야뿐만 아니라 우리 경제 각 분야에서도 의미 있는 성과가 많이 창출됐고, 아시다시피 지난달 18일에 캠프 데이비드에서 한미일 정상이 사상 최초로 만났을 때는 정말 어떤 안보 분야에서 이때까지 없었던 정말 중요한 결정들이 많이 내려지고, 경제 분야에서도 첨단 기술과 공급망 강화 등 여러 가지 협력의 기반이 더욱 공고해졌다고 하겠습니다. 또한 지난주에 있은 아세안 G20 정상회담 계기에 여러분께서도 아시다시피 양 정상이 정말 화기애애한 친밀한 분위기를 연출하고 또 많은 대화가 있었다고 합니다. 이러한 긴밀한 한미 관계를 바탕으로 우리 양국 간의 교역과 투자도 계속 늘어나고 있습니다. 우리 백악관 통계에 따르면 한국 기업들은 바이든 행정부 출범 이후에 약 한 1,000억 불 이상을 미국에 투자했다고 합니다. 미국 역시 반도체, 바이오 헬스 등 첨단 산업 분야에서 한국에 대한 투자를 확대하고 한국의 혁신 역량을 강화하고 있습니다. 양국 간의 교역 규모도 2자릿수 이상으로 매년 증가하면서 조만간 중국에 내줬던 교육 1위 자리를 다시 찾아올 날도 멀지 않았다고 생각합니다. 오늘의 주제인 마더 팩토리 전략은 저희들도 한국 정부도 미국 정부도 공통적으로 추진하고 있는 전략입니다. 국회에서 저희들이 많은 지적을 받습니다. 우리 윤석열 정부 출범 이후에 미국 등지에 대한 투자가 너무 많이 돼서 우리 한국 산업이 공동화되지 않느냐. 저는 이렇게 얘기합니다. 우리 예를 들어서 삼성전자가 테일러시의 반도체 공장 신설을 결정했습니다. 그러나 지난 4월에 삼성전자가 용인 반도체 클러스터를 발표한 300조 규모의 투자는 테일러시의 투자의 17배에 달하는 최첨단 투자입니다. 그것이 우리 한국 정부와 기업이 추구하는 우리 마더 팩토리 전략을 잘 나타낸다고 하겠습니다. 오늘 주제인 반도체 배터리 관련해서도 많은 기업들이 미국에 투자를 하고 있습니다. 삼성전자가 파운드리 시놉시스 투자를 하고 있고, 여러 가지 SK 실트론 등도 미국에 대규모 투자를 진행 중이고, 마찬가지로 미국의 설계 장비 기업인 램 리서치나 듀폰 등도 한국에 투자를 하고 있습니다. 배터리 분야를 보더라도 우리 배터리 3사가 미국에 활발한 투자를 하고 있고, 미국의 관련 기업들도 한국에 마찬가지로 투자를 하고 있습니다. 이런 양국 간의 투자 확대를 통해서 정상 간의 어떤 관계를 기반으로 한 양국 간의 관계가 이 기업 간의 그리고 일반 국민들 간의 확대되면서 양국 간의 어떤 교류와 협력이 더욱 강화될 거라고 봅니다. 우리 산업협력에 대해서 유일한 우리 컨퍼런스는 우리 한미 산업협력 컨퍼런스가 이런 양국 간의 어떤 협력을 더욱 강화하는 계기가 될 거라고 생각하고, 산업부를 포함한 한국 정부도 적극 지원하도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you, Mr. Zhang. Last but not least, we have Mr. J. Biggs, Deputy Senior Commercial Officer of U.S. Embassy in Korea. Please give him a big hand.
Thank you. I'd like to start first by thanking the organizers, Ambassador Choi, Chairman Choi, and also Vice Minister Zhang for all the support that you have provided us. My name is Jay Biggs. I'm the Counselor for Commercial Affairs at the U.S. Embassy here in Seoul. And it's a great pleasure to be here today. This year, as some of the previous speakers have mentioned, this year marks the 70th anniversary of the alliance between the Republic of Korea and the United States. For our two countries, what started as a military alliance has evolved into truly a global strategic partnership. The Republic of Korea and the United States have forged enduring economic ties that reinforce every aspect of our alliance, from mutual prosperity to commercial investment, environmental cooperation, and stronger cultural connections. During President Yoon's state visit to the United States earlier this year, President Yoon and President Biden reaffirmed that Korea and the United States are committed to advancing and deepening economic and commercial cooperation. And as James Kim mentioned, the US and Korean economies are more intertwined now than ever before. Last year, our bilateral trade in goods and services reached an all-time high of $227 billion. Korean firms have announced tens of billions of dollars of new investments into the United States, particularly in semiconductors, electric vehicles, and battery production. And equally important are the number of joint ventures formed between US and Korean companies. I would just want to emphasize here that as Korean Americans, you play a critical role in shaping this relationship. In your everyday life, you embody many of the traits that have helped make Korea become the cultural and economic powerhouse that it is. Your ability to understand both American and Korean cultures is a huge boon to the US. It really is not an exaggeration to say, immigrants such as yourself are what really makes America great. Working with a number of Korean Americans on my team, I marvel every day at their ability to see and understand the subtle nuances that sometimes I miss. And I should mention here, we have my colleague, Jay Park. Jay, do you want to stand up? He's one of the officers in our commercial section, is a fantastic addition to our team. And I feel blessed to have such a resource as we work to continue to strengthen our bilateral relationships. So on behalf of the U.S. Embassy in Seoul and the U.S. Department of Commerce, I want to thank the Korean American Association for having me. Kachi kabsi kamsamnida.
Thank you for your kind remarks. Thank you. Before we begin our keynote speech, we'll have a 1-minute break time. To ensure smooth proceedings, please ready for next session.
How's this? Good? Can you hear me now?
Ladies and gentlemen, the conference will begin. You are kindly requested to take your seats. Now, we will move on to the keynote speech. Today, we have two distinguished speakers to share with us their insights into U.S. think tank CRS. First, let us invite Dr. Mark Manning to the stage for his keynote speech. Dr. Mark Manning, you're on the stage.
Great. Can everyone hear me, I hope? I guess if you can't, just somebody will cut me off or let me know. Anyway, thank you so much to all the organizers, KAA, KCCI, AmCham, and MOTI, for inviting me and also Karen, my colleague Karen Sutter, to come address you. It's a real honor. We wish we could be over there, but you'll have to do with me here in my basement in just outside of Washington, D.C. As some of you know, I am a specialist in Asian affairs at the U.S. Congressional Research Service, also known as CRS. CRS has existed for a little over 100 years. We provide information and analysis to members of Congress and their staff. We're housed at the Library of Congress right across the street from the Capitol building, and that's why you can see the Library of Congress in my background. And I should say before I start the substantive part of my remarks that what I'm about to say represents my views only. They don't represent those of CRS or all the 535 members of Congress and their staff who I work for. So what I'll do is I'll very briefly sort of talk about the big picture strategic situation that the United States and South Korea and all our companies are facing. And then my colleague Karen Sutter will dive into the more specifically on the commercial and economic situation. So again, just looking big picture, I think we can identify several characteristics of the interaction among states in Northeast Asia today. The first, as you all know, we're dealing with growing great power competition and the solidification of blocs increasingly among the great powers. The Camp David summit among the U.S., South Korea, and Japan. You have that on the one hand, and then you have what looks like to be a Kim Jong-un, Vladimir Putin meeting later this week, along with increasing North Korea, Russia, China cooperation on the other hand. So you have this solidification of blocs in the region. Secondly, the competition among those blocs appears to be increasingly becoming zero-sum on many, many issues, so that gains for one side are seen as by the other side as a loss. And thirdly, issues that previously could be handled separately increasingly are being treated by governments as linked to one another. We see this geographically, for example, in growing linkages between the challenges over Taiwan and challenges over North Korea. We also see it functionally in that commercial issues, for instance, are being seen by governments and many corporations more and more as matters of national security more than in the past, at least in the last 30 or so years. It's certainly here in the United States. And also the health of key national commercial sectors like semiconductors, electric vehicles, et cetera, are being increasingly seen as vital to national security and prosperity. And of course, this is why the Biden administration has emphasized U.S. industrial policies to promote U.S. competitiveness in a way that we haven't seen really in a generation or so. So within this context, President Yoon has really reoriented South Korea's national security strategy, increasingly aligning it with the United States as well as Japan's Indo-Pacific strategies. And he's also placed a greater emphasis on strengthening deterrence, especially with respect to North Korea. And the Yoon administration appears to believe that peace through strength is a better way to approach North Korea, and also to a certain extent China as well. One issue that the three allies here, the US, South Korea, and Japan, are dealing with when it comes to China is that we all have a different level of tolerance for tension with China. The US is most tolerant, and Japan is kind of in the middle, and South Korea has the least amount of tolerance. But I think we're all dealing with a situation where, compared to 5-10 years ago, we've become much more tolerant of tension with China and seen it as being necessary because of China's behavior over the last decade. Finally, I'll wrap up and turn it over to Karen by just noting that for the US and Japan, there increasingly is a belief that Our bilateral alliance is no longer sufficient to maintaining regional stability, and we need to augment it by building other partnerships. And I just mentioned the US and Japan because I think South Korea, at least this government in South Korea, is increasingly coming to that realization as well. So the US and Japan have were out in front a little bit on this. And for you all in the private sector, I think one implication for this is that I think it has made the Biden administration more willing than perhaps past US administrations to listen more to allies and allied concerns, and that includes the private sector as well. And I think you see this in the waivers that have been given to South Korean semiconductor firms, the willingness to adjust the Inflation Reduction Act implementation to minimize the impact on South Korean auto firms, et cetera. So I really think that the U.S. has done its best to try and minimize the impact there. Although I totally acknowledge that there is an impact, and we at CRS certainly hear that quite loud and clear from the South Korean embassy when there are problems. So with that, let me end my remarks and turn it over to Karen. Thank you.
Dr. Mark Main, thank you very much for your insightful speech. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. Karen Sutter for our second keynote speech. Dr. Karen Sutter, you're on the stage.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be with you today. I work closely with my colleague, Mark. I focus at CRS on China trade, investment, and technology issues. So as I talk about the potential for US-South Korea cooperation, I'm going to have kind of a China angle to what I'm talking about. And what I'd like to do is talk very briefly about two things. One is the broader context of what's happening around the United States and South Korea vis-a-vis China, and then talk about some of the key areas and issues where I see potential for cooperation. So as far as the broader context, I think I would say three things. One is you all are with companies, you're either working in China, you're working with China. This is not surprising to you, but basically since 2006, there has been a dramatic change in how the Chinese government has approached industrial policies, trade and investment, with a much more assertive approach to requiring or forcing technology transfer, issues related to IP theft, and increased role of the state in giving preferences and advantages for Chinese firms vis-a-vis outside or foreign firms. And I think since 2016, what you see in response to this, and it took a while because these Chinese policies started in 2006, but you see efforts by the US government both to promote and to protect US national security interests, economic competitiveness, and broader global rules and the global order. And so you see selected examples of the US trying to protect industry. You see this with foreign reviews of foreign investment by China of US companies. You see this with certain restrictions in 5G networks. You see this with export controls. You see this with the use of Section 301 and tariffs in response to China's behaviors. You also see more recently efforts to promote industry. And in particular, it's already been discussed by several previous speakers, but the US CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, both of 2022. And then I think the other key piece, the third piece here, is the US prioritization of working with close allies. And that's where South Korea is really right in the middle of this. And you see coordination on foreign investment reviews of Chinese efforts to buy strategic companies in South Korea, in the United States. There was a recent block, for example, the South Korean government by PRC state investment firm trying to buy Wise Capital, trying to buy Magnachip out of South Korea. Cooperation on export controls and advanced semiconductors, supply chain coordination, also in semiconductors, but also in electric vehicles and renewable technologies. And then also the effort to set new plurilateral rules that would constrain China potentially. And that has been an effort in particular between previously with the United States, Europe, and Japan, but I think there's probably interest in expanding that. You also see the United States working with Europe to set red lines on tech transfer in aerospace. And you see a new G7 effort in cooperating on infrastructure globally. So very quickly for the United States and South Korea, I think, obviously there's market competition. You have two market-based economies, right? You have, firms that go head to head in different areas, but I think there's a lot of synergy and there are a lot of places where the United States and South Korea fill gaps in each other's supply chains. I think there's a lot of complementary aspects of the economic relationship. And so you think of in areas like steel, shipbuilding, semiconductors, we've talked about EV batteries, consumer electronics. And then I think secondly, you also, I see a lot of shared concerns, and Mark mentioned, companies and countries are going to have different levels of concern and different reactions to their concerns, but concerns about China's aggressive industrial policies and what China's requiring in the market as far as technology transfer. There was a recent condition set, for example, when Intel sold its facility in Northeast China to SK Hynix. That affected both companies and what they had to commit to the Chinese government. And then I think also with this focus on allies working together, China has worked very hard to try to disrupt this. And I think it's not surprising or novel to anybody in the room, but just mention a couple of things. So there's, basically select incentives. Some investors get preferences, some don't. There's pressure on localization. So for example, SK Hynix in Wuxi, I don't know if SK Hynix is in the room, but can talk about that. Pressure incentives on Tesla Shanghai to localize their supply chain for electric vehicles. And procurement restrictions. So for example, I think it was very deliberate that the Chinese government chose to put pressure on Micron, but not Samsung at a time where they didn't need memory chips. So these things are all very calculated as far as China touching and trying to create market pressures. And then I think coercion and threats. So you had most recently China updating its export control catalog and adding certain materials used in particular by Japan and South Korea in the semiconductor supply chain as a way, one might argue, potentially signaling that if you, i.e. South Korea, Japan, shift too hard vis-a-vis China, there may be consequences. It's a reminder of the tools that China holds. And then finally, and we can talk more about it in the discussion, I think there's a lot of opportunity with regard to the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. And there are a lot of questions, we field a lot of questions about these two pieces of legislation and now that they're in law, and happy to talk about it further. But I think these two bills, now law, have elements, as I'm talking about, both of promoting and protecting industry vis-a-vis China that are not just for American firms. I think there are a lot of opportunities for South Korean firms in this space as well. So why don't I stop here and look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karen Sutter, for your outstanding speech. Now, we will have a short Q&A session with our distinguished speakers. Professor Park Jae-geun, could you give us a question? Please pass on the microphone.
Okay. Dr. Manning and Dr. Shutter, thank you for your nice talks. I have two questions. As you know, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix have operated memory factories in China. In addition, our government and the semiconductor companies have supported actively implementation of a CHIPS Act and the IRA. However, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix have a problem to upgrade their Chinese factories because both companies have to follow the CHIPS Act rules. US government has allowed to upgrade their Chinese factories for only 1 year. And every year, both companies should need to get approval for upgrade. As an alliance with the USA, why US government has a limit on upgrade both company in Chinese factory? If you know, what is the current U.S. government policy and the trend for Chinese factory of Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix? Second question, for all AI semiconductors and advanced package technologies, the cooperation between Korea and USA would be extremely important for leading future semiconductor technologies. If you know, what's the current activity of National Semiconductor Technology Center and the National Advanced Packaging Program driven by US CHIPS Act?
Thank you very much. Should I go ahead and answer those now? Mark, do you want to weigh in?
Nope. You know everything on this, Karen. So
Well, the more you know, the less you know in this space.
go ahead.
I mean, I guess I'm not privy to, the conversations with companies and the Department of Commerce with regard to specific China restrictions. I guess I would just say that I think in this vein of the US government laying out efforts to both promote and protect industry vis-a-vis China, I think it's not unique to South Korean companies with regard to setting certain conditions. For example, if monies are given by the Department of Commerce, some of the we call them guardrails sometimes, or some of the restrictions were in the congressional legislation itself that were somewhat general. And then some of the guardrails or restrictions have been added subsequently as the Department of Commerce is implementing the CHIPS Act and related provisions. I think the concerns seem to stem from this idea of trying to diversify supply chains outside of China. While China is coming from behind, it is putting more money and more effort and more aggressive policies toward its industry goals, probably than any other country. And so the concern that China can catch up and surpass quickly in certain areas. So I think because, Samsung has its foundry second line as well, I think, in Xi'an, and SK Hynix in Wuxi. I think the idea is that they seem to be trying to straddle companies that have legacy facilities before things were enacted, but not wanting to put in additional advanced expanded capacity within China, and also knowing, that there's probably, be interested in your views on this, that there may be a lot of pressure and incentives coming from the Chinese government to expand and upgrade as well, in addition to what companies themselves want to do. And I would just highlight, I think what I've seen in the media, and I don't know, I haven't talked to companies directly about this, but I had seen a press report of SK Hynix kind of pulling back some capabilities back into South Korea. And you see this with some US firms as well, and kind of dividing up the business as far as, what will be for China and then what will be for global markets. And this is not always efficient, but you do see some activity there. So I think I think it's not specific. Although these examples are specific to leading South Korean companies in the semiconductor sector, I don't think the US government policies are unique to these firms. It just may be what they're experiencing being exposed in that market. And I would assume that there are conversations between US and South Korean officials. I would assume that there are also discussions with companies and the US government and the South Korean governments, that this is not just all happening, that there's some discretion as far as implementation and decisions being made. On the question about the National Semiconductor Center, there are a couple of things that happened this spring that you may have seen. So they announced, this all happened in the April-May timeframe. So there was an announcement, there was a white paper that came out that talked about how the center was going to be formed, what its goals were. It's set up as a public-private partnership. Then they announced the key leadership of this center and who would be guiding next steps. There seems to be a little bit of debate about whether it will be one center or whether it will be spread across different areas. And I have not seen anything more specific that advanced packaging Center falls under this. But that is definitely something to watch. And my experience with that office is that they're very open to conversations. So if this is something, that you're interested, in having a direct conversation with the Department of Commerce, either because you want to find out more information or because you have certain concerns, including the ones that you're raising with us, my sense is they're pretty open to that. I've had a lot of contact with them and it's been fairly easy to connect. So there's some, in some with that question, there's some things that have been announced, and then there's still a lot of key details about how it's actually going to work that are still forthcoming. And I would say, I don't know exactly when that will be forthcoming, but I would think maybe over the next couple of months, we should see more. Thank you for the 2 questions. Very good questions.
Thank you. We will move on to the next question.
예, 그 배터리 분야에 대해서는 제가 질문을 드리겠습니다. 오늘 컨퍼런스가 한미 협력 컨퍼런스인 만큼 한미 산업 협력이 점점 필요로해지고 강화되는 상황에서 그 2차 전지에 관련돼서는 현재 그 투자 인센티브를 통해 가지고 한국의 배터리 셀 메이커들이 지금 진출을 하고 있거든요. 근데 현재의 진출 방식 자체가 투자 인센티브에 의해서 생산 기지 중심으로 진출을 하고 있는데, 오늘 이 컨퍼런스의 주제로 있듯이 마더 팩토리라는 형태로 해서 차세대 전지 R&D 센터라든지 거의 그 토탈 패키지 형태로 미국의 우리나라 그 셀 메이커들이 진출하기 위해서는 현재 IRA 상에서는 그 AMPC 이외에는 인센티브가 규정되어 있지 않는데, 우리나라 셀 메이커들이 한국의 마더 팩토리뿐만 아니라 미국의 셀에 관련된 마더 팩토리를 구축하기 위해서 미국에서 또다시 추가적으로 제공해 줄 수 있는 투자 인센티브가 혹시 있는지 여쭙고 싶습니다.
I didn't get any translation on that. Did you, Karen?
I did not. Is someone able to provide a brief summary of the question?
Then I repeat the question. The Korea Battery US Automobile Alliance is more necessary than ever from South Korea's perspective. The United States is the top priority region for global mother factories, apart from Korea. As Korean battery and electric vehicle manufacturers seek to upgrade their entry strategy into the United States, from simple production bases to mother factories, then companies are curious about what additional incentives could be provided in addition to the AMPC.
Okay, thank you.
Karen, that's
You want
more
me
in
to
your
take
hands,
that,
yeah.
Mark?
Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead.
Yeah, I think again, in US policy, in the Inflation Reduction Act, you see both incentives for industry to be basically basing assembly or production in North America, and then to be sourcing batteries and critical minerals from either North America or from countries with whom the United States has a free trade agreement or a critical minerals agreement. So South Korea with the US FTA is right there center. And South Korea also has a lot of investments already in the United States. So I think the other part of this, in addition to incentives, I think that's very important for South Korea are the restrictions. So the restrictions in the Inflation Reduction Act talk about countries of concern, and the country of concern that economically matters in that grouping is China. And so I think, in order for South Korean EV battery companies to put themselves forward in the US market, some things to think about are some of the creative structures that are being used. I've been watching certain Chinese companies seeking to join consortiums in South Korea, saying it doesn't matter, they can take a minority shareholding, they just want to qualify for the benefits. So, South Korean companies showing that they're 100% South Korean, that, because this is a question that the Treasury Department has not yet answered. They've put out, initial guidance, they've put out a notice on proposed rulemaking, but they really haven't addressed what about the role of China or Chinese-controlled firms in Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, the United States, North America generally. So I think that it's not an incentive, but it's almost like a reverse incentive in the sense of showing, that a South Korean EV company, what is your supply chain with regard to your critical minerals, where you produce. It's not just where you produce, but also it hasn't been determined who do you produce with. So this question has also come up with, nickel processing in Indonesia being controlled by certain PRC firms, for example. Does that count as Indonesia or is that Chinese? Or what percentage of shareholding of Chinese investors in a joint venture? Or what about if you're using a Chinese company's technology? This is a new creative strategy some companies are using. It's not a joint venture, they're saying, but they said, oh, we're just, licensing the technology from the Chinese party. I think these decision points are going to be very important for South Korean firms in the US market because of the scope and scale that China has been able to achieve in EV batteries. And once upon a time in 2009, China had a very aggressive industrial policy in batteries. And these were the very early days before CATL and BYD became anything. And the Chinese government basically required foreign EV companies that had existing relationships with Panasonic and LG and others to switch to qualify. There's a procurement rule, and to qualify to sell in China, they had to abandon traditional suppliers. So this is, what's happening now is Chinese industrial policies, what happened in China, geographic China, is now affecting the global market. And now Chinese companies have global scope and scale. At the same time, now that China wants to export or invest in outside markets, these governments now have new authorities in what they can decide about what they're going to allow and not allow, in part of what happened in the market because of these PRC industrial policies that began back in 2009. So I don't have another idea for another big incentive, but I think there's a reverse incentive in here that maybe is not getting a lot of attention. So just to highlight that for you.
Thank you, Dr. Karen Sutter, for your enthusiastic question and answers. Please give them a big hand for our speakers. Now, we will move on to the next session. Today's conference consists of two sessions. For the first session, Mr. Park Jae-geun, professor at Hanyang University, will give us a presentation on global mother factory strategy for semiconductors. Please welcome Mr. Park with a big round of applause.
네, 반갑습니다. 저는 반도체 디스플레이 기술학계에 회장을 맡고 있는 한양대 박정은 교수입니다. 저는 제 인생이 85년 1월달 삼성전자 입사를 해서 지금까지 다행인지 불행인지 모르지만 반도체를 지금 전공을 하고 있습니다. 자, 오늘 제가 발표한 내용은 우리 반도체 마더 팩토리의 추진 전략에 대해서 간략하게 같이 이야기를 논의해 보도록 하겠습니다. 잘 아시겠지만 글로벌 반도체 산업 현황을 간단히 리뷰를 해보면 아시는 것처럼 우리 반도체는 우리나라 수출의 20%를 차지하는 중요한 산업이었고요. 최근에는 이제 반도체 경기가 좀 다운돼서 많이 줄었습니다만 결국 반도체 산업은 이미 우리가 디지털 시대로 진입을 했고 또 4차 산업혁명 분야의 시장이 계속해서 이렇게 지속적으로 증가를 하기 때문에 계속해서 반도체 시장은 성장하는 그런 상황을 맞이할 것입니다. 특히 여기 보시는 것처럼 2030년도에 반도체 시장의 전망을 보게 되면 약 21년도에 약 한 5,900억 달러에서 매년 약 7% 정도를 성장을 해서 2030년도가 되면 약 한 1조 650억 달러로 성장한다고 맥켄지가 보고를 하고 있습니다. 특히 주 성장하는 분야를 보면 컴퓨팅 및 데이터, 그리고 무선통신, 전기자동차 분야가 지속적으로 성장을 할 예정입니다. 쉽게 우리가 이야기하면 2021년에서 30년 되면 반도체 시장이 1.8배 성장을 할 것이라는 것입니다. 자, 그러면 이제 현재 전 세계 시장의 매출액 규모로 봐서 점유율을 보게 되면 역시 미국이 약 한 반 정도를 차지하고 있고 우리 한국이 한 20% 정도를 차지하고 있습니다. 근데 생산을 하는 측면에서 보게 되면 우리 한국이 한 23%, 대만이 한 21%, 미국 한 11%를 차지하고 있죠. 그래서 미국에서 계속 너무 이렇게 대만의 의존성이 크다는 그런 지적이 있기 때문에 현재 앞에 두 분 기조 연설에서 이야기한 것처럼 중국에 대한 제재가 현재 진행이 되고 있습니다. 우리나라는 메모리 강국입니다. 그래서 D램 시장에 삼성, SK가 합치면 약 한 보시는 게 한 70% 정도 되고요. 랜드 플래시 메모리는 삼성, SK가 합치면 약 한 50% 정도를 차지하고 있습니다. 반면 파운드리 시장은 우리나라가 굉장히 좀 미미합니다. 여전히 대만의 TSMC를 추격하고 있고요. 팹리스는 뭐 보시는 것처럼 대부분의 미국 회사가 주도를 하고 있는 시장이 되겠습니다. 그리고 AP, 스마트폰에 들어가는 AP, 애플리케이션 프로세서를 보게 되면 여기 보이는 것처럼 우리 한국이 한 4%, 그리고 대부분의 미국 회사들이 주도를 하고 있습니다. 시모스 이메이지 센서의 경우는 일본 소니가 한 40%, 그리고 삼성전자가 한 25%, 하이닉스가